From contact tracing apps to mass mobile messages, Asia is making good use of technology to shape its early responses to COVID-19. And many of these capabilities were developed even before the crisis. Well, for more, we're joined by Oliver Tonby, Asia Chairman of McKinsey and Company. Oliver, thanks for joining us. So what are the most successful uses of technology to fight COVID-19 here, especially here in Asia?
Thank you, Glenda, and I'm delighted to be here. So what we have looked at in the middle of this crisis that is affecting lives and livelihoods of people, what we've tried to look at is how has technology, digital technology in particular, helped to save lives, but also safeguard some of the livelihoods that we have. Let me give you a few examples. Number one, and you mentioned this, the tracing and testing technologies. South Korea, within weeks, had put up 50 drive-through testing stations where in 15 minutes you go through a procedure and a few hours later you get the reply on your mobile phone. Or here in Singapore, the Trace Together app, 1 million downloads in a matter of weeks. So these are just some technologies on tracing and testing, but it goes beyond that. Remote diagnostics or telehealth. Wuhan, by middle of February, had set up, because they could use 5G technology, had set up a remote diagnostics center where doctors from all around China could help diagnose patients in Wuhan. So these are a couple of examples of helping to save lives. But we also see technology being used to help save livelihoods. So, for example, we see Lazada, which is an e-commerce platform here in Southeast Asia. They onboarded farmers and wholesalers so they can get their produce out to customers, because this produce was otherwise, the supply chains are broken or the stores are not open, so this goes to waste. But through this e-commerce platform, you get the products to the customers and they can make the sales. So these are just some examples. And by the way, work from home, which is now very close to home, I'm doing this interview sitting in my own home, has allowed millions of people to do their jobs across the whole country. And by the way, also schooling, as we heard about earlier. So these are just some examples how technology is helping save lives and livelihoods.
And how does this compare to how Asian countries handled SARS then, when the tech wasn't perhaps as advanced?
Listen, absolutely. I think it is much more advanced now. And we see actually Asia responding, I think, even more quickly than some other regions around the world. If I were to give an example, in the US, we've seen a 10% increase in the penetration of e-commerce as an example in the last 8 weeks. It took 10 years before that to get to that same level of increased penetration. Here in Asia, it's moving even more quickly. And the reason is the infrastructure has been built out. The investments, 46% of VC investments are happening in Asia. Governments have been ready. Since SARS and MERS and others, they have changed policies that basically allowed a much quicker response to this crisis. Businesses have been digitizing for years. We now see the number of online transactions for banks is anywhere from 1.4 to 5x the number of branch transactions, depending on the country. And by the way, we have the most digitally savvy population in the world. 54% of Asians are online. They are ready to use mobile transactions. 76% of Indonesians are ready to do transactions over their mobile phone compared to 44% in the US. So all of these factors combine into making a much more rapid deployment of technology and for the force of good.
Oliver, you're working from home. Steve is as well working from home. So during this circuit breaker and for some countries during the lockdown, technology will be expected to change further as we go and live post-pandemic. What are some of the changes in technology do you see happening?
Listen, I think what COVID has done is it has accelerated a number of changes that we saw in the making for years. For example, the penetration of e-commerce has just skyrocketed for obvious reasons. I think that has come to stay. Many people have now tested e-commerce. We have seen the work from home that you mentioned. I think many people will be thinking about, how do I now get a better balance? So I think we'll see much more combinations of working from the office, work from home, more flexibility in and around that. I think the whole digitization of all sectors, by the way, is going to accelerate. So I think we see many of these technologies that have now been accelerated by COVID. They are absolutely here to stay.
Well, thanks very much for speaking to us today. Oliver Tonby, Asia Chairman for McKinsey and Company.